sorry. But I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. In this world there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate. We think too much and feel too little. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness. Without these qualities, life will be violent. And all will be lost. All will be lost. Do not despair. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die. Dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. Will return to the people. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world to do away with greed. Now let us fight to free the world, to fulfill that promise. Let us all unite.
Hey folks, welcome to the Corporation Nation. It is Thursday, the 24th of October. Coming up on Halloween pretty soon. Ooh, spooky. So, I wanted to, we've got Freeman Burt from Colorado with us today, and he's going to be joining us every Thursday, and I'm certainly excited about that, as I'm sure many listeners are. Before we get to Burt, though, I wanted to share something in regards to the Common Core discussion that we had. A friend of mine sent me this link, and I'm floored yet again. I hadn't considered this angle of how deeply entangled this Common Core thing is. We now know it's in every branch of the military, the CIA, the FBI, NASA. Common Core is everywhere. All vocational training schools, almost all the states. Some states have different variations. For instance, Texas has C-scope. It's actually worse. So let me just read you something now here. The National PTA, or Parent Teacher Association, comprises millions of families, students, teachers, administrators, and business and community leaders devoted to the educational success of children and the promotion of parent involvement in schools. PTA is a registered 501c3 nonprofit, i.e. non-governmental association that prides itself on being a powerful voice for all children, even though there's no children in the PTA, a relevant resource for families and communities, and a strong advocate for public education. That's very important, a strong advocate for public education. Folks, this is the grassroots, or I guess you could say the false grassroots organization that comes in and gets parents all excited about Common Core. Membership in PTA is open to anyone who wants to be involved and make a difference for the education, health, and welfare of children and youth. Oh, isn't that sweet? Again, children, the most incredibly humongous political weapon that's ever been conceived. So, what does the PTA say that it stand or opinion on the Common Core standards are? National PTA, this is from the PTA.org website, by the way. It says National PTA is uniquely positioned to be an influential and credible voice in advancing the Common Core state standards. It's a joint effort led by the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices and the Council of Chief State School Officers to develop a Common Core of K-12 standards in English language, arts, and mathematics. The goal initiative is to develop internationally benchmarked standards that ensure all students are held to consistent expectations that will prepare them for college and career. Not give them knowledge, not teach them how to learn, but instead tell them what to think and prepare them for the workforce in the future. To date, over 45 states have adopted the standards, in addition to the District of Columbia, Guam, American Samoan Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands, and the Anchorage, Alaska School District. Now, here we go. National PTA position. Okay, this is the PTA's position at the top level. And you have to understand that the way the PTA works is like any other organization. The smaller groups do what the larger groups do, and the larger groups do what the national groups do. This is exactly how private associations work in the United States. They take over incrementally, first on through a national organization, and then they take their wares to the states and to the local level. And the PTA, like I said, is basically the grassroots, the false or fake grassroots movement to ensure that Common Core standards are accepted by parents. Now listen to what its national PTA position is. National PTA volunteers have adopted several position statements and resolutions beginning in 1981 in support of a voluntary, clearer, higher academic standards for all students. National PTA's position statement on education emphasis, which is capitalized. That means it's a product or service, basically, something that they promote and sell. National PTA's position statement on education emphasis covers PTA position on voluntary standards. Specifically, National PTA supports nationally agreed upon voluntary standards if they are derived in consensus or by consensus at the state and local level. Parents must be involved in the process. All right, this is such an important statement because this is how Agenda 21 functions, and that is by consensus. Now, consensus is a funny word. For instance, what you might call shill scientists have come to a consensus on global warming, which they are now calling everything from global cooling to climate change because, global warming wasn't seeming to work, considering that there were record low temperatures every day across the nation, considering sheep were being buried in snow and dying because they can't figure out why all of this snow is falling around them all of a sudden in Ireland, why it was snowing in places it's never snowed before in Africa, that sort of thing. All of a sudden the global warming thing didn't work. And so the consensus changed to we'll just call it climate change. That'll just cover anything, and we can blame it on man. So, through consensus, using the Delphi technique, the PTA actually gets the support of parents, no matter what parents think, and no matter how little parents actually know about what Common Core actually is. It doesn't matter. It's an organization, just like your representatives, to take your individual power away from you and be basically the consensus of the group. That's basically what the PTA is doing. National PTA opposes federal legislation and or regulations that mandate standardized testing or would lead to such testing. Well, it's very clever. And, of course, the federal government is now ready to, I think it's, if I can remember, the 1029, I think it is, a Senate bill that has already passed committee and is going to basically federally require states to do this. Of course, they've already got it in states, so it won't be hard for the federal regulations to come in. That was the whole plan all along. So I just wanted to get that through because as the massive web of Common Core reveals itself through this little research project that I've been going on, I'm finding out that it extends past education, obviously, into the military. The word core basically extends to all industry who will wish to see Common Core standard children and adults being trained for the workforce. So this thing is... This is the Huxley wet dream right here. It really is. This is frightening. Very frightening. Burt, I apologize for taking up all that time, but I wanted to get that across to people so that maybe they can actually participate in their PTA and raise a stink and actually do something about this Common Core thing. Because now we see that the PTA has an integral part in allowing this to happen locally. So it's time to get involved, folks. Oh, I hear the music already. Jeez. Burt, we'll get back to you when we come back. You're on the Corporation Nation. Stay tuned.
The mission was successfully completed. Reality.
Folks, welcome back. You know, one more little tidbit here before we go to Burt. Another friend sent me something else, and you know, you might be interested in it. The headline, it says that Army halts its training program that labeled Christians as terrorists. Now, who do you suppose could have possibly wrote legislation like that? Fundamental Christians, evangelizing Christians are terrorists. I can't imagine who could possibly have written that lesson plan. Army halts training program, in other words, it's education or Common Core training program, that labeled Christians as terrorists. Oh. And we also have this funny thing going on right now. We have 9 generals that have been fired and 2 military leaders that have been suspended. I really wonder if there's a little coup going on, a little takeover of the military. Anyway, having to do with the Common Core, I thought you guys would appreciate that. Burt, Freeman Burt, are you there, sir?
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Well, I'm trying not to let myself get depressed with all this research I'm doing.
I understand completely. Trust me. But there is a sense of enlightenment. You always see the light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, it sort of brings you out of the slave mentality and brings you into the possibilities of what could be.
Exactly, and that's what I always try to say, you know, that we need to see the glass half full as opposed to half empty. And all we can try to do is try to find solutions, and sometimes the very solution in many aspects appears to be an expansion or participation in the problem, as we were discussing previously. You know, this whole system with the Constitution for the United States, when you look at it down to using the same word you were using before, core, to the core of it, you find out that it's a majorly flawed system, and the more you look into it, it's flawed. Nevertheless, it's the one system that everybody appears to be operating under. So if we can at least cut from the edges of it those things which are making it operate even more wrong, I don't know how to say it.
Well, that's operating privately and commercially is what it's doing.
Yeah, so if we can do certain things to at least remove some of the burden that the self-perpetuated system has created for itself, we actually may have then more breathing room so we can make the system even better. I don't know if we want to get into all that today.
Well, I don't think it would be hard to make it better. I mean, that's, you know, there's some jokes out there about attorneys chained together at the bottom of the sea. That would certainly make it better. But, well, I wanted to start off by reading a definition that was presented by John Harris. If folks aren't familiar with John Harris, he is a Brit. And he did a great presentation, a 5-part presentation called It's an Illusion. John Harris, It's an Illusion. If you get a chance to watch it, I highly recommend it. It goes over the corporate nature of government, basically. And he has a couple definitions on here that I think are very apropos to what needs to be understood about the Constitution. Now, the definition he has is that the fundamental rules, this is a definition for what a constitution is. The fundamental rules, written or unwritten, that establishes the character of a government. So the character of a government by defining the basic principles to which a society must conform. So to be governed, the society must conform to the character and rules and laws of government. So we have some important words here, character being the first one. So if we're talking about the character of something, you might compare that to what clothes someone is wearing. In other words, it is not necessarily the law It is the character of the law, the character of government. So when you hear the court, or when you hear anyone basically saying that something is either constitutional or unconstitutional, that term only refers to the character of law or character of government. It does not refer to a law specifically. Now, there's a thing called law of the land, which we've all heard before, but that's not what the Constitution really is. Okay, it's only the character of law. And the other word is society. So what the heck do we mean when we say the word society? Well, he defines it as society is the socially dominant members of a community. I wonder how that applies to social media. A society is a number of persons, and we're certainly going to be talking about that word today, a number of persons united together by mutual consent. I'm definitely going to be talking about that. So, a number of persons united together by mutual consent in order to deliberate, determine, and act jointly for some common purpose. So, that society must conform to government. So they have the freedom to deliberate, determine, and act jointly, but they must do so in conformity to government. It's very interesting because it really breaks down that you don't have freedom when you say freedom of speech. That means you must obey the law when you speak. You can't say certain things. For instance, on this network, I won't be able to cuss today because I only have the freedom of speech that is allowed to me by the law of Mr. John Statmiller and the FCC, if you will. So I can't say the F word, drop the F-bomb, without some repercussion. That is what freedom is. Freedom meaning to obey the law. Freedom, of course, is that bill of goods that's been sold to us that's all patriotic, but it really means that you must conform to government. So, Burt, let's talk about what is a person?
Well, a person by definition means, like you're talking about, it's a member of some form of society. That's what personhood is, because any one man can have, 1,000 different persons. It just depends on what his association is to the particular group. So if you're a member of 100 different groups, then you probably have 100 different persons.
So are you saying that I have a Gold's Gym person and a Costco person?
Yeah, just like you have an RBN person.
Hey, this is the real deal here. I'm using I hate to say real name. That's kind of a funky thing to say, but I'm actually using my real name. All right, so you're basically what you're talking about is very simply a membership.
Yes, that's what it is. And with every member comes certain duties. And that's the one point that is overlooked by many people when they are trying to understand this, difficult legal system, is that there is an inherent duty in everything you do. The problem when you go to court is that they don't tell you what your duty is. Because in order for you to know what the duty is, you must know your status.
So many levels to this game, isn't there? All right, folks, we'll be back here on the Corporation Nation. With me today is Freeman Burt. Stay with us.
It is like a finger pointing away to the moon. Don't concentrate on the finger or you will miss all that heavenly glory. Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless, like water, like water, like water. Water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. Running water never goes stale, so you gotta just keep on flowing, so you gotta just keep on, Under the sky, under the heaven, there is but one family. Do not believe in styles separate man. It's a process of continuing growth, Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless, like water. Water can flow, or it can crash. Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless, like water. Be water, my friend.
All right, folks, welcome back. Thanks for sticking with me there. So, Burt.
Sir.
We've got all these words and all these different meanings and all these things. Let's, one guy actually looked to see what the word person was, and he looked in the actual annals of law, which is all the case law, and he said it was 127 pages of legal definitions of the word person. So how in the heck do we tidy that up into a simple statement of what a person is?
Well, I mean, it's really very difficult to tidy it up. It all depends on the circumstance that you're in. Because if you're, for example, in a commercial transaction, then your personhood could be completely tied to whatever the context is of that transaction. I mean, for example, if I hire someone to come over to my house and fix my roof, I'm dealing with that man in his personhood as a contractor. Okay? And I'm treating him from that point of view, so he's a person. But in a body politic, there could be many levels of personhood within that body politic. And by body politic means anything that has to do with any kind of an established government. So using the United States as our base for our discussion, then within that body there is many layers of personhood. And personhood is, I think we mentioned this in the previous show, that it's very, is designed by its nature to discriminate, because you have persons that are higher persons than others.
Mm.
So in the body politic, you always have one person that is more of a person than the other one.
But wait a minute, I thought we had equality.
Well, and that's the thing, is that there can be equality within a certain level of persons.
See, that's a trick question, Bert. The word equality means that you are equally punishable by law. That's all it really means.
Well, it means that if one person is actually acting at a higher level than the personhood assigned to him or her, then by law they can be dragged or drugged down to the proper level.
All right. Well, okay. Let's say I'm in my Gold's Gym person. I'm out there. I'm pumping iron, right? I'm walking on the treadmill because I don't really like to jog. And am I at that point, because I'm in the jurisdiction of Gold's Gym, am I at that point a Costco person as well, or am I just the Gold's Gym person? And for that matter, am I still a United States person while I'm acting as a Gold's Gym person?
Well, you still maintain all those other personhoods, but the question comes down to which personhood are you exercising for which exchange benefit. You're not going to be in that Gold's Gym bragging that you're a Costco member. They're going to be, well, who cares? We don't sell anything.
So you're saying I wouldn't get any rights or privileges in Gold's Gym as a Costco person. I can only get privileges from Gold's Gym if I show them my license to be a person in Gold's Gym.
Right. So they're only going to recognize you in Gold's Gym as a Gold's Gym customer. Now, once you leave the Gold's Gym, well, then they might recognize you as something else and say, well, okay, here, man, why don't we make some trade here? You go buy towels for the gym and we'll give you a week's free membership. You know?
So what happens then if a police officer then pulls me over and he asks me for identification and I give him my Gold's Gym license, my person?
Well, he can't recognize you because in his capacity as an officer, he's also exercising a personhood, that can only see certain other types of persons.
So in other words, he can only see artificial things. He's not allowed to necessarily deal with living entities. He must first identify you as a member or a person of the body politic, I guess, the society.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, he has to know what is your personhood. What is the hat that you are wearing on that moment that he pulls you over? Well, let's say he pulls you over, and all of a sudden he sees your hat and he says, "Oh my God, this guy is a foreign diplomat." Well, you have a good day, sir. Sorry for bothering you, and he walks away. But if he looks at you and says, "Oh, you're just a lowly United States citizen. Driver's license, registration, proof of insurance, and make it quick because I don't want to have to arrest you." So then he treats you like a different person.
Isn't that interesting?
So the hat that you wear and the hat that is being worn by the one that you're dealing with makes all the difference. Just like when you go to the grocery store. I mean, when you get to the checkout stand, the person on the other side is playing the role of a checkout checker, right? Whatever you call them, you know? So she can only deal with you from that point of view. And you can only deal with her as the one buying whatever you're buying, and you're paying for it.
And she only has the limited rights and privileges that are granted to her by her person that has a higher status than her, yet is equally punishable by the law, but has more rights than her, who would be the middle manager or manager up all the way to the corporate president.
Yeah, so it's important to know your personhood and the degree or expansion that the other person that you're dealing with can operate within their personhood. It would make no sense for you to argue with the checker about the temperature in the cooler where the milk is being stored. She's going to say, "Well, that's not my department. I don't have anything to do with it, but but like, we can stop the transaction here and you can go to the back of the store and talk to the guy that's in charge of the department, but I can't help you with that." So you cannot go to her and argue about, milk temperature complaints.
Well, so does that mean that I can't go to a traffic court or a divorce court or a vaccine court or all the different little jurisdictions they've set up to limit liability in court? I can't go there and say, "Hey, Judge, I want to argue the Constitution with you."
That's right, because
she's just a checkout girl.
Might be, and it all depends on whether, if you're going to go to that court and you walk in there, and especially as soon as you walk in, they put a little hat on you that says driver, and then you walk in there and you start arguing all these crazy points that have nothing to do with being a driver, and the judge is like, "Look, son, I can only deal with you as a driver. Now, do you have any arguments related to your status as a driver? If you don't, this is the wrong place to talk about it."
And that's because the judge is also a member and he has limited jurisdiction. He can only talk about the motor vehicle code and whatever else he's allowed to talk about in the court. And so when he arrogantly says, "Son, the Constitution doesn't belong in this court," he's not kidding. It's just an unconstitutional court. It has nothing to do with the Constitution. It has to do with a membership that you have acquired that makes you a driver, your little unilateral contract where you give up all your rights and you accept the motor vehicle code. It's that simple. You don't go in there and pretend like it's a Constitution court. That's ridiculous.
Yes, and here's one point that was made very clear to me by my friend Tom. He said, when we, in fact, have a license of whatever it is, like a driver's license, we, in fact, did not get a driver's license from the state. It's the other way around. We gave the state a license to manage our right of moving from point A to point B.
We asked for a service, and we got it.
And we paid for it.
We pay for it. That's the worst part.
So we were a customer. We went to the state and said, "Hey, yeah, look, here's a stick. You can hit me with it every time I do not properly follow your regulations." thank you very much for that service, for making sure that I operate correctly.
Yeah, thank you. May I have another? All right, guys, we'll be right back. Stay with us.
To start to mold a new reality closer to the heart.
All right, folks, welcome back.
Closer to the heart.
You're in the Corporation Nation, and with me today is Freeman Burt from Colorado. So, Burt, basically, what we're saying here is that we are in actually so many different contractual relationships. We're talking about membership. So we have a membership with the DMV. We have a membership with the Social Security. We have a membership with the Selective Service. We have all these persons. We're not just one person. We're one person with many different personages. It's kind of crazy. So we really have to be conscious of that as we're walking around to acknowledge what function we are actually participating in when we are acting as a person or a citizen, a member of the United States. And I got to be honest, that doesn't sound very fun. I mean, that makes me want to just give up the whole thing, which is kind of what my eventual goal is going to be. So, because I don't want to be a member of this thing. It's completely corrupt, and as we discussed, it's a bureaucracy. Steeped in corruption. Why would I want to be a member of that? And of course, why would I want my children to be a member of that and be forced into this education thing we're talking about? So, I guess, and on that same note, I guess when we're dealing with the court system, we have so many. Well, why don't you tell us how many different courts are there actually? I mean, how many different jurisdictions are there? We know that we should be focusing on the Court of General Jurisdiction, because that basically translated, that means that it has unlimited jurisdiction, and that's the only place we should ever want to be. So what other courts are there?
Well, there's one big difference in there's basically two general types of courts that people really need to comprehend. There are executive courts, and then there are the judicial courts, which are supposed to hear cases based on either legislative statutes or constitutional violations. But, like, for example, the courts that deal with driver's license, those are all executive courts. So are all courts that fall under the governor of the state. And then you have like family courts. That's one of my my favorite courts as far as the degree of corruption that goes on. That is a purely executive court.
Now, what do you mean when you say executive? What does that term specifically mean? You're saying that it's a court of the commander-in-chief of the National Guard, the governor?
Yes. Yeah, it's basically one of his courts, and it's basically a law enforcement court. So everything about that court is no different than you being in a court run by policemen. That's what it is. But they try to get you to believe that it's something else, and it's not.
So it's the illusion of authority. And what does authority mean?
Permission.
Well, wait. What do you mean, permission? What does authority mean?
It means that you gave them permission to control you.
So, in other words, when a police officer claims the authority to beat my head in, he's actually claiming that I gave permission for him to beat my head in?
Exactly.
That's interesting, isn't it?
It's the insanity of the game.
Hey.
And it originates, what I'm finding out is that all this originates, and of course, I came to this conclusion probably like 3 years ago, and ever since then, I've been basically gathering more information to prove that, is that all the ills of, the major ills of this society known as the United States originates from that 14th Amendment. Because all law enforcement operates under the idea that you are a 14th Amendment citizen who has to be protected. And protection is something that people do not understand. The fact that you can be thrown in jail for 20 years is for your protection.
Yeah, and that is a difficult concept for most people to accept. And I don't know how to get it across to people, but yeah, the words like protection and right and equality don't mean what we think they mean. I mean, to protect your right of equality, for instance, means to protect the fact that police can beat your head in with your permission. It's your equal right. Okay, again, it's crazy that we don't understand what these words really mean as they relate to our person. We can't comprehend that to be protected means that we can have the crap kicked out of us and be thrown in a cell without trial, without bail. I mean, all of these things are protected tools of government. When I wrote an article called "To Protect and Serve," where, thanks to you, actually, you kind of put it in my head, and I was like, no, that can't be what it means. And I'm like, wait a minute. Are you telling me that when a police officer's, on the side of his car it says "to protect and serve," it's like the opposite of what that means? To serve means to serve a summons? Are you kidding me? It means to protect government from me? That's what protect and serve means?
And here's the funny thing, that if people start looking at these things with, from a neutral point of view, and forget about all this patriotic BS, and just look at things from a neutral point of view, an unattached point of view, you will come to realize that the society that we're actually living in is becoming closer and closer to what pure communism is. Because in communism, you have a right to be equal to everybody else. Which means that if you suddenly have a little more than everybody else, in order to protect your right to be equal, they'll take it away from you so that you will then be equal to everybody else.
Yeah, it's just like, again, no child left behind means no child gets ahead.
That's right.
Simple. I mean, how do we, it's like living in the Twilight Zone. How do you make people see that they're in the Twilight Zone? It's so, it's crazy to think that this is the way it really is. I know. Every once in a while I'll walk around and I'll figure something out in my head, and I'll just be like, it figures. That's the way it is. Reminds me of here's a little funny news for you folks. Now, my favorite movie of all time, you might laugh, but my favorite movie of all time was Rowdy Piper in They Live. Best allegory of what's going on I've ever seen. Forget the alien thing, forget whatever. It's a bloodline, really. So you have this sort of alien race, and it turns. He even says that in the movie. He says, it figures it's this way. He gets this pair of glasses, and all of a sudden he can see. He can see everything that's going on, and that's the way I feel now. That's the way I feel. I can see what the TV really says, which is to obey, reproduce, and marry. All these things. What a wonderful movie. And guess what? Not too long ago, Rowdy Piper tweeted. I don't follow Tweet or Facebook or anything like that. I just saw an article. But he tweeted a very, very interesting statement. And it simply said, "They Live" was a documentary. Now, people, I recommend that movie. It's one of the corniest. It's got some of the corniest lines. It's got the best fight scene ever. And if you haven't seen it, boy, you got to see it. They Live. It's the perfect allegory of what's going on. Burt, have you seen They Live?
No, I have not.
Oh, buddy, you got to see it, man. I'm gonna see if it's online somewhere and send you a link because it's fantastic.
I usually got my head stuck in the computer, so I guess I'll have to take a break and enjoy myself. Actually,
oh, you do, man. It's just so perfectly done. As an like I said, as an allegorical view of what has actually happened. If you pay attention to every single part of that movie, it's beyond anything I've ever seen. And for this guy to come out and say it's a documentary, it was just I'd like to interview him. I'm gonna try to get him on the show because I just thought it was so funny. Wow, anyway, Bert. So all right, so everything boils down to the 14th Amendment. Well, that's interesting. We'll read that when we come back, because sounds like the whole system is based around that. So
pretty much.
Folks. We'll come back with an hour. We'll take some phone calls in the last half hour. Stay tuned.
Don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are men. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful. Let us use that power to make this life a wonderful adventure. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world to do away with greed. A world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Do not despair. The hate of men will pass and dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. Let us all unite.
Welcome back, folks. You're in hour 2 of the Corporation Nation. With me today is Freeman Burt, and I'm Clint Richardson. Woo. Hey, there's a new article on my blog today. Thought you might be interested, considering we just had Walter Burian on the show yesterday. It's about the Chicago Kaffir, and it's called Rahm Emanuel. From how did I get it? From chief of liars when he was chief of state to mayor of lies. So basically about him coming out and saying, oh, we have millions in a deficit where, we don't have very much money. And it turns out there's over $28 billion sitting there. You might want to check that out. Again, on my blog at realityblogger.wordpress.com. So, Bert, in examining the 14th Amendment, people, and also the 13th Amendment, but basically the Reconstruction, or is that what they're called? The Reconstruction Amendments for the Reconstruction era?
Yeah, after the Civil War.
Yeah. So the big, people think of these things as, again, patriotic, but what it really was for was for the equal protection of law. Not the equal protection of people, but the equal protection of the law that would force them to do things, right? I mean, it's, I find it funny to actually, when you start reading the opinions and why things were done. Well, the Republicans didn't want the blacks to all of a sudden have a bunch of votes because there were so many blacks down in the South because of slavery that they would suddenly have all this voting power. So we can't, we have to do something. We have to make them equal under the law, but we have to limit their power. And the Democrats, of course, wanted more black votes because the black votes would be more democratic. It was totally a political move, to pretend to give rights, natural rights, but in fact limit the natural rights and put a bunch of people into unequal legal status. You had the Emancipation Proclamation, you had the 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, you had all these different things, and then you had the Civil Rights Act of 1966. Now keep in mind that The 14th Amendment was in 1968, July of 1868. So civil rights came out just before that, and that basically guaranteed citizenship, again, membership, without regard to race, color, etc. But what's the deal what's the true nature of this thing? Because what it really did, it sounds like, is just put us all into one lump sum of slavery.
Well, before we can even discuss the 14th Amendment, people need to become familiar with Article 1, Section 2 of the United States Constitution. Okay? And there's a part in there that talks about representatives, how they're supposed to be elected. So it says representatives and taxes, blah, 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 will be, which shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons, comma, including those bound to service for a term of years, because, there were white people that were also in servitude.
Lots of white slaves, yes, definitely, but they were called something else than slaves, of course.
Yeah, including those bound to servitude or bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed. So the Indians who didn't participate in any kind of a taxing scheme were excluded from being counted in this voting deal. And then this is the part that we need to remember. 3/5 of all other persons. So within this one sentence, you have free persons and other persons. So there's obviously two types of persons that they are talking about. Now, the 3/5 of all persons was changed by the 14th Amendment. Those 3/5 of all other persons are now whole persons. So keeping that in mind then makes the 14th Amendment, or it allows you to put it kind of like into a better context, right? Because now it says all persons, and Clint and I were discussing, said, well, it says all persons, so you would automatically reach the conclusion, well, they mean all persons, any person, free persons and other persons, and little persons and big persons.
You know what it sounds like to me, Bert? It sounds like you're talking about a rancher dividing up his cows and giving them some status higher than cows and pigs, and giving cows a higher status than pigs, and all of a sudden the pigs revolt, or the whatever happens, and suddenly you're gonna make the pigs get equal slop as the cows, right? I mean, it's not treating these people as human, it's treating them as persons, as members, as artificial people.
Yeah, well, and it gets a little bit more involved. I mean, right now we're basically just talking about personhood from a constitutional point of view. But when you look at it from a statutory point of view, they actually include the word things to be associated with persons. So if you're a person, are you also a thing? A thing is obviously something of no life. so it could be a chair, could be a thing. Okay? But here's the thing. It says in the 14th Amendment, all persons, and then there's the line, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. That line doesn't appear in the Constitution, in the body of the Constitution. It first showed up here.
So if I was Costco and I was to create a new amendment to my corporate charter, which is a constitution, I would say all persons or members in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction of Costco are citizens of Costco.
Yeah.
Right? But what happens when I step outside of Costco, or I don't acknowledge my Costco person?
Right, you become whoever else you are. Or you take on a different personhood that is not bound by Costco.
Well, so who does the 14th Amendment apply to?
Well, the 14th Amendment was put together because the 13th Amendment supposedly freed the slaves, right? It made slavery illegal. Okay?
Well, I mean, I would... that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah, well, and I mean, there's all kinds of people that have all kinds of ideas or whatever about what the 13th Amendment really did. But the general understanding at the time that these amendments were being put together, because the 14th Amendment was preceded by other congressional acts like the Freeman Acts and other, like you were talking about, civil rights acts and all these kind of things, trying to give some kind of right to the freed slaves. But those acts were not being taken serious. So the freed slaves were actually being treated like slaves without masters. So they were being extremely discriminated.
And so we had to change the legal status of them in order to give them equal rights. I get it. All right, we'll be right back, folks.
With schools, media, money, and meds, we control every aspect of your life through ideological hegemony. But if you think you need guns to stop tyranny, then what you waiting for? We've already stripped you of your liberty, privacy, civil rights, and dignity. You want some more?
Hey, neighbor. Welcome again to this neighborhood. I'd like to show you something. You know what this is? Or maybe if I press this button. There are so many things to learn about in this world, and so many people who can help us learn, and so many people who can help us learn. Did you ever grow anything in the garden of your mind? In the garden of your mind. You can grow ideas in the garden of your mind.
All right, folks, welcome back.
It's good to be.
We're talking about what a person is. Was a slave a person? Well, actually, no. A slave was not considered a person. A slave was actually considered property. In the Fifth Amendment, which is one of my favorite amendments to pick apart because it's just such a horrible, horrible thing. It basically says that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And of course, that means that you can be deprived of your life, liberty, and property with due process of law. And, which again is that equal protection thing. But this didn't apply to slaves because, slaves were understood as property. And this is, think what you want. I mean, to me, that makes the whole Constitution a horrible thing. But, how does this then apply to the 14th Amendment? Well, let's start with the 13th Amendment because you mentioned that. Now, when we read that, it says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except... Now, if you were going to end slavery and involuntary servitude, you would have just ended there. But it says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall be duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to its jurisdiction. Again, there's that phrase. So in other words, and this is the reason we have such a wonderful private prison industry that forces people to work for very low wage. Slavery and involuntary servitude is perfectly legal as long as you're convicted of a crime. So that's the true nature of what this is. So, of course, you have the Trading with the Enemies Act, which basically makes us all criminals anyway. We could go on and on and on with all these little facts and figures. What I'm imagining a bunch of bloodline Masons sitting around thinking, well, slavery is a good tool, but I think we could do better. I think we could create a voluntary system of slavery that would create not only slaves, but tax-paying slaves. So, we could have a whole work industry of involuntary or voluntary slaves, depending if they're prisoners or not, and we could tax them. And really, wasn't that what this was all about?
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, it's like you were talking about this guy, Ron Emanuel. Didn't he say something around the lines that you don't let an emergency go to waste?
A good emergency, yes, of course.
Yeah, well, this is what happened right after the Civil War. There was a really great emergency here. Now, the original 14th Amendment actually made it perfectly clear that it was written for the freed slaves. Okay? But they changed the wording to make it look like it was a little bit more open. Now,
all inclusive, you mean?
Yeah, it was a little more inclusive. Now, if we look at the 15th Amendment, which is the supposedly right to vote, right? It says the right of citizens. Of which citizens? Are we talking about the citizens of the states? No, it says the citizens of the United States to vote, because citizens that existed prior to the 14th Amendment had an inherent right to vote. They didn't need a new amendment. The Constitution did not need to be amended. So they amended supposedly this right to vote for those citizens who did not have the right to vote. And those were the freed slaves. So it says the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of what? Race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Why would they put previous condition of servitude if the supposed citizens, according to the Constitution, did not exist under servitude? The only people who existed under servitude were those 3/5 of the people talked about. Article 1, Section 2.
Well, it's also, I think, important to say here, and this is, people aren't going to like to hear this, but you got to ask yourself why a government, especially one as tyrannical as this one, is so interested in protecting the equal rights of its citizens to vote. Well, if you do a little research on the word vote compared to elect, they are two different things, of course. The electors elect the president. The voters basically lend legitimacy to the whole process. And I'm in the process right now of studying this a little deeper, and I'm starting to understand now that the legal process of voting is indeed probably one of the most important aspects of how we, the citizens, quote unquote, give up all of our rights to our representatives. And in fact, we give up our status as people, technically, and our representatives become the people of the United States, the people in the Constitution, if you will. And so the act of voting, why would that be so important? If you think about it, why would that be so important to give to women and blacks unless you had a purpose for it? And the purpose, of course, is the equality kind of thing. In other words, everybody should be equal slaves, and in order to do that, we have to get them to think that voting is patriotic instead of an act of actually giving consent to the whole process that enslaves them. I know that's
okay, but I want to correct you on something.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with being black or being yellow, blue, 2 feet tall, or 50 feet tall. It has to do with the status.
Yes.
It was that status that those people held. I mean, the slaves could have been anyone. Okay?
Well, that's a good point.
It was the status of the slave that was then made free, that was given this new status of citizen of the federal government.
So what you're saying is that for the first time in history, there were actually free men in America?
What do you mean?
They weren't citizens. They didn't have a status. They were free. Actually, under the law, they were actually considered free. They weren't tethered to any person or status.
Actually, that's one way that you could look at it. They were free. They were not members of the body politic.
By God, we can't have that now, can we?
Yeah. So they were actually free. Now, every one of those people that were free could have left the United States and gone anywhere they wanted to. But in order to be recognized by the other people as being members within this society, they needed a temporary protection. And that's the key that people need to understand. The 14th Amendment only provided a temporary fix to a problem that existed at that moment. And that was so that these freed slaves would have some type of protective status, because a lot of them were being abused all over the place, and many of those people were actually fought during the Civil War. And they thought that once the war was settled, they would actually be free. And people have heard of the 40 acres and a mule, right? Mm-hmm. That actually originated to give it to the freed men who fought in the war. It was to give the slaves a place to start by giving them their own land and a mule. So that's the origin of that. But what we need to comprehend is that the 14th Amendment provided a temporary fix. So once those free people gave birth to other children, those children were born free. They didn't need the protection of the 14th Amendment anymore.
Gotcha, because now they were natural born, whereas before you had a citizen that was not natural born, you suddenly had natural born citizens. I think I get your drift there. We'll be back, folks. Stay with us.
Neighbor, welcome again to this neighborhood. I'd like to show you something. You know what this is? Well, maybe if I press this button. Imagine every person that you see is somewhat different from every other person in the world. Some can do some things, some can do others. Did you ever think of the many things you learned to do?
All right, folks, welcome back.
Did you ever grow anything in the garden?
Here in the Corporation Nation. We'll take some calls if anyone wants to call in. And I wanted to say, Burt, it's interesting that you said that because I'm thinking about the Constitution, and I'm thinking, okay, the Constitution protected the 50 or the 13, I should say, but however many, doesn't matter. The 13 republics is very important. That was the original concept of the Constitution, that the federal government was required to respect and protect the existence of the republics in the 13 colonies and eventually all the states.
Yeah, and protect their sovereignty.
Right. It was not a republic. The United States is not a republic, but it's required to protect the republics. But this seems to actually bring people specifically out of the republic and into the United States as a citizen. That's the thing that I see going on here. What this should say is all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside if they choose. Because it is a voluntary thing. That's the point I want to make, because it sounds like this was actually designed to take people really out of their republics.
Exactly, and make them they took them out of the republic and took them to this foreign land known as the District of Columbia.
And in that way, they're actually getting rid of state rights. I mean, it says all over the place, no state shall make or enforce any law, da-da-da-da-da. I mean, it basically takes away all of the states' rights because the states were republics.
Yeah, prior to the 14th Amendment, the reason that most congressional acts basically fell on deaf ears is because they didn't apply to anybody. Congress could only pass acts to those residents within the District of Columbia. So in order for them to be able to have their acts apply outside of the District of Columbia, they needed someone to have their acts apply to. And that's why they did not pass up on this great opportunity of the 14th Amendment to trick the people into taking on a status that their acts could apply to.
And I guess... Go ahead.
Because prior to that, the status that was the highest status was the state citizen, and they were only bound to their particular state. The federal government could not reach into the state and try to touch those citizens, otherwise they'd get their fingers cut off. But the 14th Amendment allowed the federal government now to reach into the states to protect this new status of citizen.
And it basically, if you will, it created a new form of state on top of, just like the jurisdiction of the United States spread and mingled all throughout the whole nation. Even though it's invisible, you can't really see it, you can't point to it, it's all there. similarly, the republics got replaced with a new form of jurisdiction that was United States jurisdiction, and they still called it a state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
a private
that's getting
corporation.
into a whole new thing. Yeah, that's getting into a whole new thing, which I'm still trying to sort out so that I can explain it to people in an intelligent manner.
It's tough. It's tough.
But it is tough. And then, I guess I should mention that next month we're hoping to have this thing full speed. We're trying to make it easy for people to join this classes that we're doing, where we really go into this detail and how to take this information that you're learning about the Constitution and use it to protect yourself from these people in court. Because if you do not understand your status, nothing else matters. And here's a trick that they do to you in court, and we were talking about this earlier. When you go into court, they always put the cart before the horse. The horse is your status, and the cart is the evidence. They put it the other way around. You go into court, and they only talk about the evidence. They never talk about your status. And without your status, nothing has any meaning. Right?
Yeah. I mean, now there's going to be people out here, and just to appease this, and also myself, you're not telling people necessarily to go to court. In fact, by all intents and purposes, you don't want to go to court ever, if you can. Mm-hmm. You're talking mostly, when you say go to court, you're mostly saying, send legal demands, responses, and that sort of thing. You're not really talking about going to court unless you absolutely eventually are forced to or required to, right?
Well, I mean, most of us, when I'm referring going to court, I'm saying that you're summoned to go to court.
Yeah.
Right? By some stupid criminal violation that they say that you engage yourself.
But that doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to make an appearance in court, is what I'm asking.
Well, I mean, if you don't show up, they'll come to arrest you.
Right. So instead of an appearance, you're responding to the summons, correct?
Yeah, I mean, you have to respond to the summons, otherwise they'll come get you. So if you're going to respond to the summons, you must have some understanding of who you are before you walk in there. Otherwise, you're just going to completely railroad over you. And that's how the system is designed, is to railroad over you completely, because they don't want you to know who you are. That's why they never bring up the status of who you are. They completely avoid it.
Right, exactly. Where can people find that seminar, by the way? That website?
Yeah, that website that we're working on is one that my good friend, this guy that I know named Clint Richardson, helped me put together.
Oh, that one?
That one. Onlyfreeman.com. And if you want to grab a hold of me, then you can also email there, Burt@onlyfreeman.com. And we'll eventually have a separate email for people who want to sign on and all that kind of stuff. So we're in the process of trying to get this thing set up, because I'm just constantly getting emails from people that want to learn this thing into more detail.
Sure. And I agree with that. Now, just to be clear, I'm not affiliated with this anyway. I just helped you set it up. But I will be eventually, probably, because I think what you're doing is good, and I'll either become a member or something. I don't know. Let's take some calls. We got John in Canada.
Wow.
Hi, Clint. Hi, Bert.
Hi there.
How you doing?
I wanna run something by you, and it's just a scenario. I get a traffic ticket. I don't talk to the cop. I accept the ticket. I take it home. I take out a red marker and I put on there refused for fraud and possible extortion and send it back. I get a summons to come to court, and my name is called, and I say, that's close enough, and say to the judge, who is it you want to talk to? The flesh and blood man or the fiction? They'll ask, aren't you the full legal name? And I say, so, you want to talk to the fiction. The fiction, he don't talk. The fiction is my agent in commerce, by simple law of necessity. I am, however, the only beneficiary of this legal fiction. I have no contract with you or your regulations, because if there was full disclosure, no sane flesh and blood man would sign it. I use the driver's license simply because of the goons in uniform revenuing on the roads. How do you think that went?
Well, in a lot of courts, you try to do that, and they'll at least here in the wonderful United States, they'll throw you in jail.
Well, because again, what you're doing is you're arguing points in a court that can't hear those points.
Yeah, here's the approach that we're taking over here.
What's that?
I'm giving them the option. Who do you want to talk?
I get it. I get it. But what was the example of going up to a cashier and telling them to fix a computer or something?
Mm-hmm.
It's a specific jurisdiction. It's very, very limited, to the point where the judge, and trust me, I went the same route you did until I realized that these judges, so even though they're not judges, they're just attorneys in black robes, basically, and sometimes they're not even attorneys. Sometimes they're not even qualified to be up there. They are not qualified, and literally by law cannot, or by their legal code, cannot discuss those things with you. So I think it's a good effort, but I don't think it has any actual value to the case. I think you need to stick more to what the judge can actually acknowledge.
Well, there's another part to this, and that is the judge is trying to get that jurisdiction.
I'll tell you what. We're gonna go to break here. We'll pick this up on the other side.
With no shoes on their feet, how's the people living in the street? Oh, there's a solution. Did you see the frightened ones? Did you hear the falling bombs? Did you ever wonder why we had to run for shelter when the promise of a brave new world unfurled beneath the clear blue sky?
Okay, folks, welcome back to the show. I want to read one quick little aspect of this that we were talking about before, which was the equal protection and overview. This is from the government's website, actually. It says, the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution prohibits states from denying any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of laws. In other words, the laws of a state must treat an individual in the same manner as others in similar conditions and circumstances. It goes on to say this, and this is the important part. The Equal Protection Clause is not intended to provide equality among individuals or classes, but only equal application of the laws. The result, therefore, of a law is not relevant so long as there is no discrimination in its application. So we're not talking about equal protection of men. We're talking about equal protection of fiction, of law, of the application of law, and to make sure that everybody is punished equally. The term equality just really floors me because it's so misunderstood. So we have a case where a gentleman in Canada, he receives a ticket, he takes the Jesus approach, doesn't say anything, he sends it back with fraud, and then the court responds, sends him a summons, and at this point, he should have responded with another letter, but instead he decided to make an appearance, whether that be general or special or whatever it is in Canada. Now that was, in my opinion, the first mistake, was that you actually showed up in court when you didn't have to. Secondly, because you're basically acknowledging that that's you, that status was presumed, and you basically took that presumption and made it a reality. It doesn't matter really what you say in the court, because eventually they're going to get you to, I mean, you've made an appearance. Burt, what do you think of that?
Well, we're taking a different approach with traffic stops, and the approach is very simple. If you embrace the principles of law, maxims of law, which Clint and I have attempted to now touch on for 2 shows.
Next week.
Next time. So, and the principles of law means that you have a right of locomotion. You have a right to move from point A to point B without being molested. So if you take that very simple approach and a man stops you, okay, by using, I'm assuming, emergency lights for a non-emergency situation, and then approaches you armed, he's acting as a highwayman. Look up the term highwayman. And then you do not object. You just do whatever he tells you. And when you leave there, you go home and you begin to put together a suit against that man for highway robbery. You enter the suit into the proper court, present that man with the suit prior to going to the traffic court. Guess what? He cannot sit on the stand and make any kind of an allegation about the case without giving you additional evidence to use against him in your case. So it will not be in his interest to testify. Therefore, it will be more in his interest to drop the case.
Well, also, don't you want to try to get it into another court? You want to counter-sue, very important, because you don't want it in this limited jurisdiction court where you have no rights. You want to take it to the next level. You want to put it, in a counter-sue for an amount for his violation of your rights in order to get it into the next court. Forget traffic court.
Yes, and you have to take it to the court of general jurisdiction or unlimited jurisdiction where your status as a free, real man has even a hope of winning.
So, John, what was the, you said there's more to this? John in Canada? You still there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah, no, this is just a scenario. Because I wanted to point out, as you guys were talking earlier about, like, you have different persons, and each one is attached to a contract, whether it's with Costco or Gold's Gym or whatever. Well, they're holding me, like in this fiction, that I have a contract with them, and they're going to approach me with this jurisdictional, you broke the rules, pal. Right. And I'm saying, well, I'm not under your jurisdiction, and you're going to be really hard-pressed to get me there. Because
but see, that argument is not going to hold water in that court.
Right.
That's why your scenario doesn't work, because in that court, that type of argument doesn't work, because the judge will shoot down your argument with one simple question. He would say, sir, do you have a driver's license? And as soon as you say yes,
you're in the right court.
You're done.
Well, no, my fiction has a driver's license.
It doesn't matter. He doesn't care. Your fiction is the one that's in court right now, and you're the liability for it.
Okay. No,
the point is, John, he's not going to hear your argument because he can't.
That's right.
It doesn't exist in that court.
I understand what you're saying. Like, I've been very successful, like, with the tax thieves, and I've got them now just totally at bay. And now I'm looking at my other properties, and my vehicle is won, and my natural right to travel, and unmolested, and no revenue goon is going to come after me. And I'm going to make it painful for them.
Okay, but let me just give you this one strategy. It's much better to be in the offense than the defense. You know that, right?
Yes, I realize that because that's how I handled the revenue boys.
Yeah. And when you enter a suit against these people, you now also have the power to enter and demand subpoenas, and you get to depose those people. I mean, there's so many things that you can do when you're on the offense.
If they don't do the correct process as well, the procedure, and answer your demands, then you can ask for a summary judgment, a default judgment from the court to the court clerk. Basically, you don't even need to go to court, and you can win the case. That's the beautiful thing about that. So, listen, John, call back sometime and tell us about. We have more time about your tax adventures in tax land, and we'll move on to the next caller, Fred in Michigan.
Hey, guys, we're going to have to call this the CNB show, or CB show. You know, Clint and Burt.
Clint Burt, yeah, absolutely. Every Thursday. We'll be here all year.
Fantastic. I'm gonna campaign for you guys. Sometime I'll call back because I went through a scenario. There's this woman judge in Michigan who's now in the appellate court system, but in 1988 was in circuit court in Oakland County, Independence Township, and some guy whose license had been suspended and whose registration had expired was pulled over by deputy dogs who, of course, arrested him. And he went to court, slam dunk at the district court. So the guy appealed the circuit court, and this woman judge reversed it on the basis, she said, in citing the statutory code, the MCLA, Michigan Compiled Laws Annotated, and specifically the deputy's testimony that his license had been suspended. Ultimately, her ruling was a reversal based on the fact that he did not have a valid contract because the license had been suspended. So, some years later, I heard this guy, Gary Dixon, on KDKA radio, he was an all-night talk show host, interview a guy by the name of Bob Plimpton, who authored the book, You Were Born Free, Now You Can Live Free. So, I hunted it down here locally, found it, and believe it or not, on page 64, he's got this thing, because in the 14th Amendment about citizenship, it says, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So I'm thinking, okay, since it's a material commercial world, it must be the case that we're interfacing via the UCC, and that grants, as you said earlier, authority, as they say, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. If jurisdiction means authority, okay, so we're transferring that right over to them. But here's what it says. Without prejudice, UCC 1-308 on this document indicates I'm exercising the remedy provided in the Uniform Commercial Code, whereby I reserve my common law right not to be found nor compelled to perform under any contract, commercial agreement, or bankruptcy that I did not enter into knowingly, voluntarily, and intentionally. Furthermore,
all right, Fred, sorry, man, I've got to stop you. We're just coming to the end of the show. Listen, I mean, I have my own opinions about it, but anything that has the word commercial in it is probably not a good thing. I used to believe in the UCC thing too, but I found out that was a similar thing to Common Core, where it's enacted per state and it's a uniform law, and it's commercial. So I don't put much stock in that type of stuff anymore. Thanks, Bert, for joining us. And he'll be back next Thursday.
10-4.